Hello, and welcome to the Podquest of Bread. My name is Henry Conley. Tonight is going to be a little bit longer of an episode, and what most viewers of the Podquest of Bread are not used to. If you're a fan from the Voice of Liberty podcast, you do know what this is. Tonight, we are going to be sitting down with a candidate running for office, and tonight's interview is an especially important one for me because it is a candidate running for one of the most important positions in our government. And the candidate is an excellent person. His name is Mark Charles. But before I bring him on, I just want to give a couple quick little plugs here. If you are in the Lansdale and the Montgomery County areas, remember August 30th, we are having a Lansdale Unite rally in Lansdale, Pennsylvania at Memorial Park. And also remember to general strike on September 1st. So, without further ado, I would like to bring the excellent Mark Charles on to the podcast. Mark, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you for coming on to the podcast, and thank you for sitting down with us. Couple little housekeeping things for everybody that doesn't know how this works. I keep this banner running most of the time. This banner is just to give you a heads up. If you have a question for Mark and it's pertinent to the discussion we're having, I can bring it up on screen. Mark and I can both see it. We can both read it, so we can get those questions answered for you. So Mark, you're an independent. You're running for the President of the United States and the office of the presidency. What made you decide that to run for that office?
Well, thanks for the question, Henry. Let me first start just by introducing myself traditionally. So, Yate, Mark Charles Yunishya, Sin Bake Dene Nishle, Dr. Higlini Bashichin, Sin Bake Dene Dashiche, Dr. Chini Dashinella. In the Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our four clans. We're matrilineal as a people with our identities coming from our mother's mother. My mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, and that's why I say Sin Bake Dene Nishle. Loosely translated, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Toa Higlini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbake Dene. And then my fourth clan, my father's father, is Torachitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I also just want to acknowledge I'm speaking to you tonight from my home in Washington, D.C., and these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. The Piscataway are the nation that they've lived here, they've hunted here, they've farmed here, they've raised their families here, they've buried their dead here long before Columbus got lost at sea. And they are still here. They are still the indigenous hosts of these lands. And I want to acknowledge the Piscataway people. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am to be able to live on these lands today. As far as the question that you asked me, that's actually a good question. You know, one of the questions I get a lot is, why am I running, and why am I running as an independent? And the reason I'm running, and I could go on for a long time about why I'm running, but I've published a book maybe about 7 or 8 months ago. It was last November of 2019. It's titled Unsettling Truth, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. And in this book, I go deep into this very foundational document that went into the very founding of our country, known as the Doctrine of Discovery. It's a series of papal bulls, edicts of the Catholic Church, written between 1452 and 1493. It says things like invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. Reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and to their use and profit. It's essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are less than human and their land is yours to take. So this is the doctrine that allowed European nations to go into Africa and colonize the continent. They didn't believe the people there to be human. It's the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world, which was already inhabited by millions, and claim to have discovered it. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Now, this doctrine of discovery gets embedded into the foundations of our nation. So our Declaration of Independence, 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, actually refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. Our Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, defining who is and who is not a part of this union, who is and who is not covered by this Constitution, it never mentions women, specifically excludes natives, and counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. In 1823, 1954, 1985, and in 2005, the United States Supreme Court references the doctrine of discovery by name as the legal precedent for land titles. So in 2016, President Obama was speaking at his final State of the Union. He was acknowledging the vast divisiveness that he encountered being the first black president to sit in the Oval Office. And he was calling our nation to a new politics. It was a very good speech. And in his speech, he quoted the Constitution. He said, "We the people. Our Constitution begins with these three simple words. Words," he said, "we've come to recognize mean all the people." Now that sounds beautiful, and he got a lot of applause for that line, but as I heard him say that, I reflected on our history, I reflected on the doctrine of discovery, I reflected on our foundations, and I said, when? When did we decide as a nation that we the people means all the people? The founding fathers didn't believe it. Abraham Lincoln, who was actually a blatant white supremacist and committed literal genocide against Native peoples, he didn't believe we the people meant all the people. As good as the civil rights movement, it did not get us to we the people meaning all the people. President Trump does not believe we the people means all the people. The problem is as a nation, we've never decided that we wanted to be a place where we the people actually included everybody. And so my run for the presidency, my campaign is I'm calling the question. I'm asking our citizens, do you want to live in a nation where we the people includes everybody? If you do, we have to work on our foundations. And so the theme of my campaign is I want to build a nation where for the very first time, we the people actually means all the people.
I have to say, one of the things that definitely caught my attention with your campaign is right off the bat, the first thing that caught my attention was that intro that you did. And there's so much to unpack in what you just said. But your intro, it's so it's peaceful. The amount of homage to where you come from and the history, that is beautiful. I've always admired the fact that you acknowledge the land upon which you are actually on right now, and that it's gorgeous. It plays into like what I've been talking about a lot, which is actually righting the wrongs of our history, which is what I find so beautiful about your take on the Constitution, on the Bill of Rights, on the Declaration of Independence, and saying that making things actually mean we the people, all the people. That's unbelievable. Now, there's something within your take on the Constitution that I just wanted to hone in on, and it's something that a lot of people within I don't know if you know much about me, but I am very much a staunch, true leftist. It's something we talk about a lot, which is you reference the he, him references within the Constitution, but no reference of they, them, their, or she and hers. Can you talk on that a little bit and discuss, how'd you come upon noticing that?
About 5 years ago, I decided to read the Constitution from the preamble all the way to the end of the 27th Amendment. I hadn't done that as an adult. I think I maybe did it once or twice as a student. And I sat down and I was reading the Constitution. The further I read, the more appalled I became. I was appalled at the blatant racist, sexist, and white supremacist language littered throughout the Constitution. I was so struck, I actually started counting. There are 51 gender-specific male pronouns throughout the Constitution, 51 he, him, and his, who can run for office, who can hold office, even who's protected by this Constitution. 51 he, him, and his, not a single female pronoun in the entire Constitution. So it was just, I think earlier this year that Virginia became the 36th state to ratify the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, which would constitutionally guarantee women equal rights. And because that amendment had basically a ending date on it, they only gave it a certain number of years to be ratified. Even though it finally got ratified by 2/3 of all the states, it didn't become an amendment because that date had passed. So it's 2020. And as a nation, we still can't decide that we want women to be treated as equal under the Constitution. And so when I began reading through the Constitution, and most of us were raised to believe that the Constitution is about freedom and equality and liberty and justice for everybody.
Definitely.
But when you read it, when you actually read it, and I tell people, if you don't believe me, if you truly think the Constitution is about granting rights to everybody, get on a Zoom call with Native Americans, African Americans, and women and read the Constitution out loud. You will be appalled and embarrassed at how exclusive the Constitution actually is, and it's geared entirely towards white landowning men. In fact, I was so appalled as I was reading it, I actually copied it onto my computer, and I began using the strike-through font. I just edited the Constitution. Anytime I ran across a he, him, or his, I replaced it with a proper noun or a they, them, or theirs. Mm-hmm. Anytime I came across some sort of sexist or white supremacist language, the Three-Fifths Compromise in Article 1, Section 2, or the clause in the 13th Amendment that keeps slavery legal in prison, I just put a strike-through font through it. Yeah, we never should have said this. I didn't change balance of powers. I didn't change checks and balances. All I did was remove the white supremacist, racist, and sexist language. Actually, now this Constitution, there's a draft of it on my campaign website on the blog. If you go to markcharles2020.com and look under the blog, you'll see my draft of this Constitution. And this is my 100-day plan. After I'm inaugurated, I intend to submit that draft to the U.S. Congress and ask Mitch McConnell and the leadership of our Congress to pass this as an amendment and send it to the states to be ratified so that we can remove the racist, the sexist, and the white supremacist language. Now, this isn't going to change things overnight, but it absolutely, in the long term, because our foundations are what's broken. And let me just give you an example of how that's true. I'm wearing my hair tied, my siete. It's in the Navajo bun.
Okay.
And my hair, my siete is tied with red yarn, if you can see that. The reason I tie it with red yarn is because there's a crisis within Indian country known as missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Literally, we have hundreds, thousands of Indigenous women and girls who have, by their families, been reported missing or been reported murdered to local law enforcement, state law enforcement, even federal law enforcement. And not only are their cases oftentimes not closed, but many times they're not even opened. Frequently, the families are left to go off and search for their daughters and their wives and their granddaughters by themselves without the help from law enforcement. It's a crisis in Indian country, and we call it missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. When I was at the Frank Lemire Native American Forum last August, I was there with 10 of the top Democratic candidates. Kamala Harris was there, Bernie Sanders was there, Elizabeth Warren was there, Julian Castro was there. And they were asked, and I was there, and every candidate was asked about the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and what we would do. And most of the candidates, upon learning about this crisis, stated that they would enact some new law. They would have some policy to protect this very vulnerable demographic. But what I tell people is when your Constitution, when your Declaration of Independence calls natives savages, and your Constitution never mentions women, you shouldn't be surprised when your Indigenous women go missing or get murdered and society doesn't care. A new law isn't going to fix this problem. The problem is with the basis for our laws. This is a direct result of our white supremacist, racist, and sexist foundations. And so if we want to fix the problem of Indigenous women and girls, we have to start with fixing our foundations. The same thing is true with reforming criminal justice. After George Floyd, we've had a huge debate, defunding the police, banning chokeholds, all these sorts of things. I'm the only candidate who is saying we have to abolish slavery. There's a clause in the 13th Amendment that keeps slavery legal in prison. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party has been duly convicted shall exist within the United States. We'd never abolished slavery. We redefined and codified it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. So if we want to reform our criminal justice system, we have to start by abolishing slavery. And these are the things that Joe Biden nor Donald Trump have no interest in engaging with.
I have to say, when I was first looking at your campaign, because I first started looking towards your campaign after the political party I'm a part of selected Joe Jorgensen as their presidential candidate, and I couldn't support someone that didn't fit in with my views and my ideals. And that's when I stumbled across you through a friend of mine who actually had gotten involved with you, or slightly involved in promoting on Facebook for that. And I have to say, before I found your campaign and before I read and I've watched your introduction or your introductory video to the campaign at least 100 times. It's so powerful, and if anybody hasn't watched it, definitely go watch it. Before I watched that, I had my arguments against the Constitution, and was it the document that we really wanted to define freedom through and liberty through? But I had approached it from an entirely different viewpoint. And then after I watched your introductory video and after I read what you had to say about it, I have to say your take on the things contained within the Constitution are it's absolutely unbelievable. And it really opens your eyes. And I have to thank you, because I used some of the very things that you discussed in your introductory video and you discuss within your policies or your view for a platform. I actually just recently used that in a speech I was giving out here in Pennsylvania, just because it is so powerful. And you kind of led right into what I wanted to discuss next, which is the 13th Amendment, because I had never really looked at the 13th Amendment through that viewpoint and said, wow, okay, hold on. This is the whole issue with the criminal justice system starts right here, where we have created a situation where we still can enslave people. What would you do to fix that language within the 13th Amendment?
We have to take the clause out of that amendment. There's a clause separated by a comma. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party has been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. That clause is what keeps it legal in prison. There's a similar clause in the 14th Amendment that basically the 14th Amendment extends the rights of citizenship to anyone born on this continent under the jurisdiction of the government. But there's a clause in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment that, again, it keeps the rights under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. And so we need to remove both those clauses from the 13th and the 14th Amendment so that slavery is illegal, period. It cannot be anywhere in this country. Okay. And so it's a very simple fix. We don't even have to add any language to the Constitution. We just have to take the clause out that keeps it legal in prison. There's a great book that's called The New Jim Crow, written by an author named Michelle Alexander. And she does a really good job in that book of connecting the 13th Amendment to mass incarceration. And how, Dwight Eisenhower was talking, one of our presidents, and he had a quote I found where he said, if you want total security, go to prison. You're clothed, you're fed, you're given basic health care. The only thing you're lacking is freedom. Mm-hmm. So the way you take away freedom from a free society is you incarcerate them. Now, as a nation, we have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world.
Yeah, we do.
And we incarcerate our people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate that we incarcerate white people. This is one of the challenges that we face is literally, according to our Constitution, the criminal justice system, prison is where slavery is still legal, where you can still remove the basic human rights of our citizens. You can do that in prison, and then you can treat them as a subclass. And that's exactly what we do. This is why we have a school to prison pipeline. This is why we have for-profit prisons. This is why we have prison labor, because it's the one place where you can actually exploit people legally, protected by the Constitution.
Now, within talking about like prison reform, because I kind of want to stay on this for a minute here. I argue against the criminal justice system as it exists constantly. I'm pretty sure most people that know me are pretty annoyed with me, harping on it. But I've always had an issue with our criminal justice system where we treat people who have been, charged with a crime, whether it be a truly victimless crime or something, like murder or any of that. We treat them more as a number than we do as a human that could be changed, could be repaired, reformed, and possibly brought to a point where they are no longer a threat to society or a potential reoffender. And one of the complaints I've always had with our criminal justice system is the prison system as a whole that we have, the for-profit prisons. Trapping people in a concrete and metal barred room for 23 hours out of the day. And I've always yearned for a change towards something like, the Netherlands or Finland use, where people in prison are treated as people and are taught and are educated. What's your viewpoint on that?
Oh, absolutely. We have to completely rethink how we do incarceration, how we do our policing. We have to rethink our entire criminal justice system, and that starts by abolishing slavery. That starts by removing that clause from the 13th Amendment. You see this very clearly. I actually did some research a few years ago when you look at, because we don't have time to go into all of this in this interview, but the 13th Amendment is the capstone of Abraham Lincoln's political career. Now, most people don't know this, but Abraham Lincoln, until the day he died, was a blatant white supremacist. In the Lincoln-Douglas debates, he actually stated, he said, "I have no intention of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor allowing them to hold office, nor to intermarry." He said, "There's a physical difference between the white and black races, which will ever forbid the two from living in terms of political and social equality. But as long as they have to be together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man," said Abraham Lincoln, "believe that the superior position belongs to the white race." Abraham Lincoln was a blatant white supremacist. In his inaugural address, he actually advocated for the Corwin Amendment. The Corwin Amendment was an amendment passed by the Senate the morning of his inauguration, and it constitutionally protected slavery in states where it already existed. Abraham Lincoln supported it in his inaugural address and personally sent the letters out to the governors asking them to ratify that amendment. Now, they didn't ratify it, so it didn't become our actual 13th Amendment. So Abraham Lincoln, there's a quote of his hanging in the Lincoln Memorial. At the base of the memorial, there's a small museum about the size of a medium-sized classroom. And on each wall are plaques, marble plaques with quotes of Abraham Lincoln engraved into them. On one wall is a series of plaques with quotes about him about the Union. And in the middle of that wall is a plaque. It's about 4 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide. And it says, "I would save the Union. My primary object in this struggle," wrote Abraham Lincoln, "is not to save or destroy slavery, it's to preserve the Union. If I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." There's a plaque hanging at the Lincoln Memorial that literally states, according to Abraham Lincoln, black lives don't matter. Abraham Lincoln wanted to end chattel slavery, but he absolutely believed in the lie of white supremacy.
Yes.
And so when you actually understand that and you see the 13th Amendment, it finally makes sense, because he had no intention of making voters or jurors of black people or allowing them to hold office or to intermarry. He didn't want them a part of society. Yes, he wanted to end chattel slavery, but he did not want them free in society. And so when you understand that, the 13th Amendment makes perfect sense. Because on a whim, a white judge, a white juror, a white law enforcement officer could incarcerate a person of color and take away all their rights. Slavery was still legal in prison. And so in the 80s and 90s, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton perfected the art of mass incarceration. Ronald Reagan declared a war on drugs. Bill Clinton started mass incarcerating people. They made drug use illegal. They criminalized drug use. If you look at actually the numbers, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I've looked at this research. If you look at the numbers of deaths from opioids, in the 80s and 90s, the number of people of color dying from opioid overdoses far exceeded that of white people. In the mid to late 90s, white people began catching up to around the same numbers as people of color. And in the late 90s, very early 2000s, they caught up and the two were about even. They surpassed them in the early 2000s. And then 2002, 2003 and beyond, white people just shot up. The number of white people dying from opioid addiction just went through the roof. Now, this is, if you understand that history, right? So in the 80s and 90s, we criminalized drug use and we used it to throw people of color into prison. As more white people began dying from opioid overdose, we actually began developing life-saving techniques for our officers to use on the streets. We began treating drug use not as a criminal offense, but as a health care issue. And we began trying to find more ways to treat it. We began treating it like the health crisis that it is. But we didn't start doing that until more white people began dying from the issue than people of color. And
shows
so
how laws are crafted, or how things change the moment it starts impacting
absolutely
those with privilege.
Absolutely. And so this is where we have to completely rethink the way we do policing. And this is what's troubling, right? So in this last debate, since the lynching of George Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department, Donald Trump has come out and said, well, maybe we should ban certain chokeholds. Joe Biden has come out and said, well, maybe we should start shooting people in the kneecaps instead of in the chest. Yep. Donald Trump thinks, well, we should keep our Confederate monuments in place. Joe Biden said, well, we should probably put those things in a museum. They both agree we should keep honoring people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who actually owned enslaved people.
Yep.
They actually both agree we shouldn't defund our police. There's not a whole lot of difference. Donald Trump's a bit more rough around the edges. Joe Biden's a bit more passive aggressive, but they both absolutely are committed to keeping the status quo. Neither one of them wants to do anything radical and do something like defunding the police and rethinking how we do incarceration and policing in our country. But that's absolutely what we need to do.
I said that actually in the little speech I was telling you that I used some of the things you've taught me already. I said that to the people watching because, of course, you know, they were like the "let's get Trump out, you have to vote Biden crowd," and I said, you know, it's going to be the same under Biden. I mean, it'll be a little less worrisome of what, you know, Twitter's going to be putting out there, but in general, I mean, they're both going to be operating under the same system and the same flawed system that creates what we're at. And just to kind of segue over to something quick that's kind of like current event in a way, the whole Lincoln being a white supremacist thing. Not many people realize that. And I mean, I harped on it pretty hard when Trump was doing the whole event out in the Black Hills at Mount Rushmore, on how we're honoring someone who freed the slaves and then went, and I'm going to probably mess this name up and I apologize if I do, but went and essentially authorized the hanging of 300 Santee Sioux, I believe is the tribe that he allowed the lynching of 300 of them just shortly after freeing the slaves. And I've always found that just so ridiculous that we honor someone who did that and raise them up as this pinnacle.
It's actually even worse than that. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act. This is the act that allocated land and resources to complete the Transcontinental Railway. Within 2.5 years of signing that act, Abraham Lincoln had literally ethnically cleansed almost all the tribes from the states of Minnesota, Colorado, and New Mexico. Things like the hanging of the Dakota 38 and the Long Walk and the Dakota War of 1862, the Sand Creek Massacre against the Cheyenne and Arapaho in Colorado, the Long Walk for the Navajo and Mescalero Apache in the Territory of New Mexico, and the three primary routes of the Transcontinental Railway. The first went from Omaha, Nebraska, over to near San Francisco. The other started in Duluth, Minnesota, and went over the northern states out near Seattle. And the southern route went through the Territory of New Mexico, Arizona, and came out near Los Angeles. He was literally ethnically cleansing the lands to make way for the Transcontinental Railway. I can only imagine how many Native lives were saved because Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865.
I hate to venture a guess at how many were saved, honestly. I mean, it's disgusting to think of. I mean...
And this is the thing we don't talk about. And in the book we've written, two of the hardest chapters to read in that book are the two chapters where we discuss the true legacy of Abraham Lincoln. And it is absolutely horrific. The fact that we honor him is literally like if Nazi Germany were to honor Adolf Hitler.
Yep.
It's literally not, it's the same thing. And so, yeah, we've created such a mythology around Abraham Lincoln that is nowhere near the truth of what he actually did and what his actual character was.
And while we're on this topic, if you don't mind me going into this, before we go off into some things that I actually wanted to discuss that are a little more pertinent to the leftist in me, I have to ask, we were talking about Mount Rushmore there. We were talking about the Black Hills. We were talking about people being honored on this monument to some actually pretty disgusting people. The Black Hills and Mount Rushmore, I mean, that is a highly controversial topic that I feel needs to be discussed, at least in my opinion, because it's, there's two treaties that give that land back to its rightful owners, and we violated them. What are your stances on that?
Oh, absolutely. One of the great lessons that the Lakota people tried to teach our nation, and I love this lesson, is, those lands were stolen. The Black Hills were absolutely stolen. And then our nation carved some of the faces of some of their most genocidal and white supremacist presidents into those mountains. They felt bad about it. And so a few years later, they offered to pay for them. And the Lakota people said they're not for sale. There's literally about $1 billion today sitting in a trust fund that the Lakota people refused to touch because they said you can't buy these mountains. They're not for sale. It was just hold on just a second, my earpiece is going to fall out.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Sorry about that. I've been so many interviews today, my battery was dying on my earpiece, so I had to get it plugged in there. So just a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court issued an opinion on a very important case. It was McGirt versus the state of Oklahoma. The question in this case was basically, is the eastern half of Oklahoma reservation land or is it state land? The Creek Nation and McGirt, who was the plaintiff in that case, they were arguing that the eastern half of Oklahoma was reservation land. And the state of Oklahoma was arguing that they've never treated it as reservation land. The courts had essentially ruled it wasn't reservation land. And because they've never treated it or saw it as reservation land, it had been occupied by white people and they couldn't change it now. And in their opinion, written by Justice Kavanaugh, who actually is a very good judge regarding Native American or Indian law, American Indian law. He dealt with it a lot in Colorado, and he actually understands American Indian law pretty well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
and yeah, he's actually pretty good. And so the lower courts had ruled in favor of the state of Oklahoma, and the Supreme Court opinion reversed that decision. They ruled in favor of the Creek Nation, in favor of McGirt, and they basically said that the state of Oklahoma does not have the authority to disestablish reservation lands. They said the courts do not have the authority to disestablish reservation lands. And they said historical precedent and white settlement does not disestablish reservation lands. It absolutely was a victory for the Creek Nation and for McGirt. However, throughout the entire opinion, probably referenced 4 to 5 times, the United States Supreme Court repeatedly said that any time the United States Congress can muster the will I'm actually quoting them now. They can disestablish these reservation lands and break treaty with Native nations, and there's no one who will hold them accountable. Now, everybody knows that the U.S. government breaks treaties with Native nations. I don't know if there's been a treaty yet that they've kept. Everyone knows they do this. This was the first time I actually read an opinion where the Supreme Court stated that the U.S. Congress has the right to break treaties, and even the Supreme Court is not going to hold them accountable.
That's horrendous.
This is a deep, deep problem. And it's rooted in what I was just talking before about the doctrine of discovery. I actually gave a TEDx talk on the doctrine of discovery. It's called We the People, the 3 most misunderstood words in U.S. history. And I go through those Supreme Court cases I mentioned earlier about how the doctrine of discovery is the legal precedent for land titles. And I especially look at the 1823 case and the 2005 case. The 2005 case I lay out as one of the most white supremacist Supreme Court opinions written in my lifetime, except for now maybe this McGirt case. And that opinion in 2005 was written and delivered by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Even though she is, yes, she is the voice of dissent on the left in this very right-leaning conservative court, but when it comes down to land titles, because land titles in this nation are based on the legal assumption that natives are savages and are only occupants of the land, while white people have the right of discovery to the land and other true title holders. What this does is this makes white supremacy a bipartisan value, that even Ruth Bader Ginsburg will rule in that favor when it comes down to land titles. And so when we have the court, again, this isn't even 2005, this is 2 months ago, stating that the U.S. Congress has every right to break treaties. Now, this is the challenge, right? They say, so the U.S. government can break treaties and even the courts won't hold them accountable. Now, when we broke our nuclear treaty with Iran, right? Yep. The Obama administration negotiated this treaty with Iran. The Trump administration didn't like it, so they broke the treaty. This freed Iran, correct? They no longer had to abide by the terms of the treaty.
Yes.
So most people think that treaties are only about native lands. Where can natives have reservations? Well, if you truly understand the way treaties work, yes, they would establish reservation lands, but if there was a treaty removing the Cherokee from North Carolina and putting them in Oklahoma, yes, the treaty would establish their reservation lands, but the treaty would also give the U.S. government the right to use the lands in North Carolina. So you would think that if the treaty was broken,
they'd get
not only would
back.
that disestablish the reservation land in North Carolina, in Oklahoma, it would return the land to the tribe that they left. That would normally be the case. But because of the doctrine of discovery and the understanding that natives are savages and have no rights to the land, this is why the U.S. government can break treaties with native nations and not have to return the land that was settled in that treaty.
That just absolutely blew my mind right there. I hadn't even thought of that. Holy crap. That gets deep and complex real quick.
Oh yeah, people think that treaties are about native rights. No, treaties are about this nation of immigrants' rights to actually be here.
Yeah. Holy cow. That changed that. Oh man, that's gonna give me a headache later as I think about that one. Definitely gonna have to watch that TEDx though, because I have it on my watch list. I just haven't had the chance to actually fully sit through it.
Yeah.
Now we have 2 pending questions from the YouTube audience, but I will save those for last because what I want to do is I want to kind of shift into something that means a ton to me, and it's something that will mean a ton to a lot of my fans and my friends that watch this podcast. Now, just to explain who I am and what I am, you heard me refer to myself earlier as a true leftist. And what I do through this podcast and I do through my activism is I attempt to kind of address the United States very off-kilter view on what the political spectrum is, where the Democrats somehow are considered leftist, even though in any other country they'd be center-right. So there are things that I want to ask that kind of pertain to the true leftists, people like myself who are more of the anarchist, socialist, and communist side of things. And they're really simple questions, but they're very important, I think, when you talk about humanity and with how humanity-driven your platform is and your policies and everything that you want to do. These become extremely important. And the first thing I want to ask is one that tends to make people kind of shiver a little bit and get their feathers a little ruffled, and that is the topic of Medicare for all, or a equivalent of it, where people are not denied access to health care based upon their ability to pay, and acknowledging that having health care is a innate human right, the right to health. What are your stances there?
I absolutely believe healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I am very intrigued by Bernie Sanders, and I have a lot of respect in the push he's made. You know, when he ran in 2016, his primary issue was on economic inequality. And over the past 4 years, that's really morphed into this notion of Medicare for all became his real talking point that he's been really hitting hard for the last few years. And I absolutely believe that healthcare is a right. It's not a privilege. Bernie has not convinced me yet he knows how to pay for it. I'm not convinced that taxing billionaires is the way to fund our social programs, because taxing billionaires means your economy has to continue producing billionaires. I'd much rather live in an economy that doesn't produce billionaires. So we need to address that problem at some point. The other thing I tell to all of the Bernie supporters, and I have a lot of Bernie supporters who follow me and are interested in my campaign, is had Bernie Sanders not suspended his campaign, had he gone on to defeat Joe Biden for the nomination, had he been able to get elected as president, and had he been able to drive Medicare for all down the throats of the Republicans, what we would have had is we would have had a great Medicare system for white men. And everyone else would have been a hodgepodge, because he was not yet addressing the systemic racism, sexism, and white supremacy in our foundations that dictate how all of our goods and services are distributed. And so one of the things I've said to Bernie Sanders supporters is we have to address the foundations first, so that when we actually find a way to make healthcare a right, not a privilege, we can distribute it equally and equitably. And so what I'm trying to say is we have to address these foundational broken things first. And then we, very quickly after that, we have to do that so that we can actually distribute this healthcare that's a right, not a privilege, to everybody who lives here.
I absolutely love that answer, and I gotta applaud you. That whole, you want to live in a society where we don't produce billionaires. I love it. It's that resonates very much with me, and it actually will resonate with a lot of the LibSoc group that will wind up watching this interview. Moving from that, talking about a society where we don't produce billionaires, talking about a society where people have the fundamental right to life. Right now in the United States, we are preparing to face the largest eviction crisis ever. We're preparing to face probably what will be the largest foreclosure crisis to ever hit this country. We are about to have 40 plus million people that in the blink of an eye are going to lose the very structure that provides shelter to them. And so a lot of people like myself, we get attacked by those that are truly on the right for saying things like rent is theft, and arguing that access to land and the access to use land is more of a right to the people than it is a commodity. What is your stance on something like that, where people would say that land should not be a commodity that's bought and sold?
So this is, again, getting down to the heart of the doctrine of discovery. And as I said earlier, the doctrine of discovery, going all the way back to 1823, and as recently as 2005, has become the legal precedent for land titles. So the doctrine of discovery, again, it's about exploitation and profit. And you know, it not only does it set up land as a commodity, but it creates this value system where land is there, land as well as people are there to be exploited. So, I mean, this gets into our whole environmental crisis that we're facing right now, where again, we've been treating the environment like a commodity, something to be exploited so that we can profit from it, rather than something we have to learn how to live in partnership with and sustainably within, so that we can continue to exist for generations and generations and generations beyond ourselves. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is the core plank of my platform is that I deeply believe the United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation I would put on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that happened in South Africa, in Rwanda, and in Canada. I wouldn't call ours Truth and Reconciliation, though, because reconciliation implies there was a previous harmony, and if you know our history, you know that's not true. So I would call ours Truth and Conciliation. Now, as I begin talking about this, a lot of people, especially relatives and other indigenous peoples, especially from South Africa, will come to me and say, Mark, Truth and Reconciliation didn't work in South Africa. It's been 25 years, we have a new constitution, but nothing fundamentally changed. People from Canada will come and say, Mark, Truth and Reconciliation is going to work. Yes, we had Truth and Reconciliation here, but it didn't produce anything that's really going to be lasting. And one of the things I am most adamant about, and this is one of the reasons I'm running for president, is in our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we must put land titles on the table. Right now, land titles are based on the doctrine of discovery and the understanding that natives are savages and are only occupants of the land. So therefore, they have no say, they have no voice, they have no sovereignty over their traditional lands. White people, white Europeans have the right of discovery to them, and they can exploit, profit from them, and do whatever they want with those lands. So we have to begin to rethink that, and we have to allow the native nations of this country to have a much more sovereign voice in how these lands are used. And I can promise you that most of the way native nations do not look at lands is very different from the way that the country looks at lands. Western European culture is highly individualistic and has been deeply influenced by this doctrine of discovery. And so even the fact that, at Standing Rock just a few years ago, we had tens of thousands of native peoples from hundreds of tribes coming together, trying to tell our colonizers that water is life and you can't drink oil. This was a great opportunity to teach our colonial nation how to live here more sustainably. One of the things I'm doing in my economic policy is I'm telling, if right now we have the Republicans saying that they have built the most prosperous economy while they've destroyed the environment. We have Democrats saying we can have a prosperous economy while we save the environment. Both parties are centering the economy over and above the environment. My environmental policy actually decenters the economy and says we may have to make some very tough economic choices so that we can save the environment, bring it back from a tipping point. This is, just now, we've finished 6 months, right, of a global shutdown. 5 months of economies grinding to a halt. Our carbon output in the last 6 months has been decreased by only 17%.
Yeah.
Think how painful these last 5 months have been. Think of everything that stopped. Manufacturing, production, transportation. Things have ground to a halt. And we only reduced our carbon by 17%. The goal by 2030 was to have a 50% reduction and to have carbon neutral output by 2050. Can you imagine how painful that is going to be?
Extremely.
We have to decenter our economy. If we have Democrats telling our citizens that they can prosper while we save the environment, they're kidding themselves. We have to begin to think about these things differently. And so I'm adamant that in this Truth and Conciliation Commission, land titles and our relationship to land and the way that we exploit and use it has to be at the center of that dialogue.
Sorry.
No,
No, I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, no, I love that because like that actually pretty much just answered what I was gonna ask as the next question on the environment. And I truly believe that the environment, I mean, too many people look at it as nothing's happening or we are not an indirect cause of it. When in truthfulness, we are, and I think I just lost your video there, we are a part of the problem. We are essentially, a lot of people treat it as if, the old analogy of a frog in boiling water. If you dip them right in the boiling water, they'll jump out. But if you slowly raise the temperature, they'll wind up dying. And I fear that's the course we're on the way to. Now, the last thing I wanted to ask before we kind of get into just a couple of the questions here and then letting you kind of say your piece and do a little outro, is I wanted to discuss the last thing that I really have a major concern about, and that is people not having access to food and not having access to water. Two things that are a fundamental part of life and that should never be denied to someone based upon their ability to pay or not pay. And it falls into this whole thing where we treat elements of life like a commodity instead of as an actual thing that sustains life.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that?
So one of the things I've actually been I followed the Democratic campaigns very closely. And I was very intrigued by Bernie Sanders and with his Medicare for all and healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I was also deeply intrigued by Andrew Yang, who talked about a universal basic income. I liked what he had to say. Again, I'm not convinced he knows how to pay for it yet, but I liked what he had to say because he's rethinking what's going on. And rather than trying to stop progress in technology and automation, all these other things that are happening, which is allowing, I mean, right now, Wall Street is absolutely flying high at the moment, while Main Street is still absolutely suffering. The two are completely disconnected. We have billionaires who have more than doubled their wealth almost. And we have people who can't even pay their rent. And we not only do we have to have an economy that doesn't produce billionaires anymore, but I think one of the ways we might be able to get there is to think about having something like a universal basic income, where companies that are basically getting rid of jobs through technology and through automation, rather just than being able to purely profit from the fact that they no longer need human labor. I think there needs to be a way that we actually say, yeah, you're able to make a lot of profit from this, but your automation, your business model is actually hurting our nation as a whole. And so there's a way that has to be, I'm not even going to say tax, because tax makes it feel like they've earned the money and we're just taking a share back from them. It's not a tax. It's a responsibility to somehow fund what they're using and what they're taking. And so to find a way that we can provide basic universal income to people who are losing their jobs because our technology is getting more advanced. I also would include that we have to find a way to rethink what it means to be incorporated. Right now, our corporations are set up so they protect liability. So because of the limited liability of corporations, we have people like Donald Trump who can start businesses on money borrowed from their fathers. They can drive these businesses into the ground, literally driving them bankrupt, leaving people without jobs, without income, without any kind of security. And then they walk away having pocketed millions of dollars. That should not be legal. we have to rethink. I'm not saying, so I would love to think of a way that we can incorporate, but yet hold corporate executives accountable. So right now, even we have all of these companies going bankrupt, and yet their executives their CEOs and other executives are being paid 6, even 7 figures because they want to keep their talent. They don't want them to jump ship while the company's going bankrupt. I would say if you profited from a corporation, so let's say you went into a corporation and you had $1 million. So that $1 million is safe. But let's say while working for the corporation, you earned $100 million. And then the corporation goes into the ground and you still walk away with your $100 million. No, I would say actually you can pocket a reasonable amount of an annual salary, maybe $250,000 or something like that. Everything over and above that is actually you can be held accountable for. You have some liability. If you've profited wildly from a corporation and during your tenure there, that corporation gets driven into the ground, what you profited from that corporation, both in salary, in exorbitant salary, as well as in stocks and investments, I think you need to be held accountable. So when the company goes under, before your employees lose their jobs, your executives have to pay back some of the things they wildly profited from that corporation.
I could kind of jive with that. I'm not gonna lie. My distaste for billionaires and the class warfare that exists within that really does jive with me. So what I wanted to next move into is some of the questions and knock some of them out because I did promise people we would do that. And this live stream, of course, is going on the official channels, as I told you. I also do a watch party on my personal Facebook so people don't miss it. And one of my close friends, Anthony, who's a fellow activist out here in Pennsylvania, he had this question. This is more pertaining back towards the whole Medicare for all, wealth tax, and all that fun stuff. What he said is, fact is, we do live in a society based on capitalism. Couldn't a wealth tax help lead society to a place where people strive for a wealth balance? How do we get to the society you propose, and who sacrifices, if not the wealthy?
Yeah. So the problem I have with a wealth tax is when you tax someone, people feel like they've earned it, and then they're giving it back. So it almost feels like it's a charity that they're paying back for. Like I've earned my money. It was laughable during the primary debates when Michael Bloomberg was being challenged by Elizabeth Warren. And he said, I've earned my billions of dollars. I worked hard for that money. No, he didn't. You can't earn $1 billion. I hate to tell you this, Michael, you can't. You can cheat your way to $1 billion. You can exploit your way to $1 billion. You can take advantage of the taxpayers to get $1 billion. You can't earn. No one's labor is worth $1 billion. You cannot earn $1 billion, and he proved that because when he promised, he built up his staff by promising people they would have a job till November. When he dropped out, he gave all his employees a laptop and didn't pay them anymore. That's how you get $1 billion, is you make these empty promises and you exploit your labor. He just proved how he did it. And so when you tax people, you let them earn an exorbitant amount of money and then you tax them, they feel like they're actually doing a favor by paying their tax. It's a psychological thing. I would actually rather make it harder to earn that much money, where it actually is a part of your expenses. So it's not a tax that you first earn and then you pay back. No, this is a part of your expenses. This is a part of what you need to do to run your business or to do your work. Just like most people don't say, well, I was earning this all money, but I had to pay my salary of my staff. No, your staff salary is a part of the expense of doing your business. And so rather than taxing people, so they feel like they're giving you some kind of a benefit or being benevolent by paying their taxes, I would rather say, no, there are expenses to doing business. When you use technology and we innovate in ways that actually take jobs away from people, yes, that can make things more efficient, but that also makes it much harder to feed our nation. And so for the ability to use this technology, you have additional expenses. They're not taxes. They're additional expenses that help us continue to function as a society because we don't exist merely for the billionaires.
I like that. That's a solid answer. Now on the YouTube stream, we had we had JP. Could you go into more detail as to how Medicare for All will mostly only help white men?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, that we pass, again, Medicare for All gets driven down the throats of the Republicans, because that's the only way we actually get things passed today, right? I mean, we no longer have bipartisan work. So when President Obama got elected, he shoved healthcare down the throats of the Republicans. When Trump got elected, he shoved his border wall down the throats of the Democrats. Like, this is the way you get things done now. You do executive orders, and then you shove other things down the throats of your opponents. And so if Bernie Sanders was able to shove Medicare for All down the throats of the Republicans, meaning we have it, but half the people aren't happy with it, right? And especially the leaders, they're very upset about it. So can you imagine now what would happen when every 4 years or every 8 years we got a new administration in, and if someone from a conservative administration came in, and now women's health care, especially women's reproductive rights, were a part of Medicare for All? Well, what would happen to those benefits, to that part of the system, when you had someone in office who didn't want to provide that sort of health care? It would come and go based on who was in office.
Makes sense.
And so what I'm saying is we have to first fix our white supremacist racism and sexism, so that we don't white men would have great health care, and all the rest of us would get a hodgepodge, and it would ebb and flow based on who was in office.
That absolutely makes perfect sense. Moving to the next question, and I believe this is going to be Lord Danis. I'm not going to try the last name. Do you have a new VP pick yet? Now that news came out last week that pseudonym,
yes.
Pseudonym.
Yeah, I do not have a new VP picked yet. We are hoping to give a status update later this week, but we are actively searching, and currently we're actively vetting candidates for the VP. And so we are hoping to have at least a status update, if not an announcement, within the next week or so. We're actually we're working very hard because we need a VP to get both on the ballot or even write-in access in a lot of states. And so this week, because we don't have a VP, we actually were not able to get write-in status in Texas, and we may not be able to get ballot access in Louisiana. So we're working very hard. We know that there's a lot riding on this, but we also want to make sure we make the right decision. So watch our social media. We'll probably have an announcement, or at least a status update, by the end of the week.
Awesome. Now, I'm going to preface this last viewer question I'm going to pull up here very quickly. The person asking this question is actually a extremely dedicated youth activist within the Libertarian Party. He has jumped like full bore into politics, into electoral politics, into being involved in campaigns. He has a bright future, I guarantee it, as far as activism goes. And that is a question from the Facebook stream, Ryan Jenkins. Mark, hello, my name is Ryan Jenkins, and I am 12 years old. If elected, how will you get the youth involved in politics and in elections?
I actually have spent a lot of time listening to and trying to understand the issues within Gen Z. And I am very excited about Gen Z. Gen Z doesn't know the world without high-speed internet. And Gen Z has, a large portion of Gen Z has taken upon themselves, much like this young man has done. I forget his name again, Nolan?
Ryan Jenkins.
Ryan. Much like Ryan has done, they've jumped full force into activism and having their voice be heard. I like to contrast them with millennials a lot because millennials have been screwed economically. Millennials are a bit more passive aggressive, so they're making it work, right? They're running the gig economy, they're driving for Uber, they're renting their houses out on Airbnb, they're making it work through the gig economy. Gen Z is being screwed environmentally. But Gen Z is like, oh, hell no. Like, we're not going to let that happen. So they're organizing a global climate strike. They're, buying up all the tickets to Trump's Tulsa rallies. They're, they're cleaning up the plastic islands. They're calling for the right to vote at age 16. Gen Z, actually, I would agree, has a very bright future in knowing for their voices to be heard. And a lot of it is because they understand social networking. They don't know the world without high-speed internet. So social networking is just the air they breathe. While most of us are trying to catch up with technology, for Gen Z, this is just the world they live in. And one of the ways that I want to work very hard for Gen Z is I'm actually want to do a lot of things to transform the way we do education. As I've spoken to Gen Z students around the country, I know that a lot of them, and especially the older ones who are coming out of high school, they're going into college. Gen Z is, their top age is about 20 right now, 19 or 20. So they're going into college, their first or second year. And a lot of them are bored out of their minds because our education system is completely analog. And they're not able to use the technology that they understand and have sitting at their fingertips. And so one of the things I'm actually been in discussion with, even this past 2 weeks, is what do we need to do to transform and to move our educational system into a digital age? And I don't want to, yes, we have to deal with things like college debt. We have to deal with things with paying our teachers better. We have to deal with things that we're talking about a lot within education. But I believe we have to find a way to basically allow Gen Z to use the technology that they have at their fingertips and to be able to assume most of the stuff that we're now teaching them. Let me just give you an example. So when I was young and I got a research paper, if it wasn't in my neighbor's Encyclopedia Britannica and I couldn't find it in the library down the street, that was all I had as far as research. That's all I had. So I had to trust everything my teacher said, and I had to believe most everything I read. And then I would memorize these things and regurgitate them in my papers and my tests at the end of the week, end of the class. Well, Gen Z, they have all this research at their fingertips. They can find things on their phones, they can find things online, they have this information there. And most of Gen Z have become experts in something that they've learned outside the classroom, not by reading books, but by watching YouTube videos. Whether it's making slime or building drones or programming AIs. Many of them have learned this skill. And most of the stuff we're asking them to learn in school, they're like, why do I have to know that? I can search it. It's there. Why can't I go above and beyond that, use that as building blocks? Just like with cars today, right? You don't need to know how to service your car, change your oil, all these things. Why? Because cars are so advanced, you probably will do it yourself anyway. 100 years ago, when you had a car, you had to absolutely know how to fix it because there's no one else to do it. But today, you don't need to. The same thing is a lot true with a lot of what we're asking Gen Z to learn. They don't need to know those things. They can search it. It's there at their fingertips. And so we want to transform education so we can assume a lot of that information and let them go steps beyond where we are today. I really want to empower that within Gen Z. And I think if we can find a way to do that, if we can find a way to allow Gen Z to stand on our shoulders and to use technology and to not have to fill their brains with all of this easy elementary information that is so easily searchable today, that they will be able to take steps far beyond what we've ever even imagined. So in order to empower Gen Z, in order to give them the tools they need to go far beyond where we are today, I want to transform the educational system for them.
That's awesome.
I want to help them to be able to do the things they're trying to do already. But our educational system is actually, I would argue, holding them back because it's stuck in an analog world.
That's beautiful, and I hope that answers Ryan's question, and hope he enjoys that little piece. I hope he was able to hear it. And yes, he did hear it. He says, "Great response, thank you." Now, Mark, what I traditionally would do when this podcast was known as the Voice of Liberty, and now that it's known as the Podquest of Bread, I'm going to continue the tradition. What I would traditionally do at the end of an episode with a candidate is I would turn the mic over to them and give them some time to kind of plug themselves and give a closing statement. So I'm going to hand this over to you now, and the time is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be on your podcast. It was fun to talk with you today. I appreciated all the questions that the people asked. One of the things I want to address with people is a lot of people will look at my campaign and they will treat me as a protest candidate. And he doesn't have a chance to win. And he may make some nice statements. He may sound good, but we're never really going to get there. And I really want to begin to counter that. And I want to do that by reminding people that change never comes from the center. Change always comes from the margins. And our center, the two-party system, the Democrats and the Republicans, are all about maintaining the status quo. If you've been watching the DNC these past few days, you'll notice that the main theme coming out of the Democratic Party and out of Joe Biden's campaign is that he wants to restore the soul of America. Now, that theme is not actually very different from Donald Trump's theme of making America great again. They both talk about how things were so much better in the past. Donald Trump wants to make America great again because he said we were great in the past. Joe Biden wants to restore the soul of America because he believes the soul of America from the past was so much better. Well, our past is rooted in the doctrine of discovery. It has a deep history of enslavement, of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of deep sexism, of marginalization and dehumanization. Our past is not very great, and the soul from our past is not very attractive. Our campaign is trying to acknowledge the past. One of the themes of what I'm trying to do, there's a quote by George Erasmus, who says, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build a community, he says you have to start by creating common memory. I love that quote. I think it gets to the heart of our nation's problem with race, which is we don't have a common memory. We have a white majority that remembers a mythological history of discovery and expansion, opportunity and exceptionalism. And we have communities of color, women, LGBTQIA2S+. We have people from the margins who have the lived history of stolen lands, broken treaties, slavery and Jim Crow laws, boarding schools, segregation, mass incarceration, internment camps, families being ripped apart at our borders. And there's no common memory. And there's no point in our history where you can look back and observe healthy community, especially across racial or even class lines. So one of the things I want to do is I don't want to ignore our past, but nor do I want to idolize it or make a mythology out of it. I want to acknowledge it for what it is. It was deeply broken, hugely fractured. And I want to create a common memory. And I want our nation to look forward, not to reclaim some former greatness, not to rekindle some spirit from the past, but to actually do something that we've never done before, which is I want to build a nation where for the very first time, we the people might actually mean all the people. But I can't do it alone. I need you. I need the voters of this country. I need the citizens of this nation. Not to relive the past, but to take concrete steps into building this much brighter and more hopeful future. And I invite you to join us. You can go to our website at markcharles2020.com. I have a 9-minute announcement video. We released it when I announced my campaign in May of 2019. Today, it's one of our best campaign tools. If Donald Trump is one of the most divisive candidates our nation's seen in decades, and Joe Biden is one of the least inspiring candidates our nation has seen in decades, this vision will restore your hope in our political process. It confronts our challenges, it lays them out, and it gives a vision for how we can move forward into a better future. I invite you to sign up with our mailing list, to sign up to be a volunteer. I invite you to donate to our campaign. I invite you to in some way align yourself with us to confront the lie, the hopeless lie of the two-party system, to break the status quo, and to create a nation where we the people truly means all the people. Asyahat, my relatives, walk in beauty, and may we learn how to walk in beauty together.
That's awesome. And I'm just going to say this again. If you haven't watched the announcement video, watch it. It's absolutely stunning, and it's very mind-opening. Mark, thank you for coming on the Podquest. It's awesome to have you on. You're an inspiring person, and I'm excited to vote for you. I'll be honest with that.
Thank you very much. It's been great to be with you today, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward, hopefully we can do a follow-up at some point in the future.
Definitely. So I'm going to drag you off screen for a minute so I can do my close, and then I'll communicate with you after I take it off live.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you for watching the Podquest of Bread. Just a couple of things before I close up for this episode. Anybody that wants to learn more about what the vision that is presented within the Podquest of Bread, what I mean when I talk about true leftism and what I'm actually striving for as a society myself, be sure to tune in to the Podquest of Bread every night at 9 o'clock p.m. Tonight's will probably be a little delayed as I have to get off of this and then kind of get wired up for the next episode, but definitely be sure to check that out. We will have a new merch store dropping soon. Currently, it's under the old name, teespring.com/store/Voice of Liberty. It's the best way to help out the Podquest of Bread. It costs roughly $50 a month to put on this podcast, plus other little expenses here and there. And as always, thank you for tuning in. I hope